Tonight, the chairman is Robert Robbins.
Hello. Our 4 contestants this evening all come from Scotland. They are Michael Kerr, an actuary from Edinburgh, Eric Wormald, a teacher from Perth, John Widdowson, a headmaster from Dumbarton, and Mrs. Monica Clough, a writer from Dunblane in Perthshire. As you know, the rules are few. You have 10 seconds to answer, and you can answer 5 in a row should you answer 5 correctly. So, let's start with Mr. Kerr. Where was last December's Davis Cup final played?
In America.
Oh, you cunning devil, you cunning devil. I think you shall have that. Yes, why not? I don't want to be discouraging right at the outset. It's Palm Springs, California, but that is America. I could easily have said America was a very big place, but it is. But you have it, yes, America. What are the staple and most characteristic colors of Delft, China, Mr. Kerr?
Blue and white.
Correct. Which honor was bestowed upon the French author Anatole France in 1921, 3 years before his death? High honor, I should say.
The Nobel Prize.
Right for you. Lake Titicaca lies on the borders of which 2 countries?
Peru and Bolivia.
Right for you. What is the centigrade equivalent of minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit?
Minus 40 degrees centigrade.
It is. I'm glad I let you start as you did, saying America, because you went on, you got 5 in a row, and now everyone's going to fall about with admiration. I should say that you get an extra mark for doing all that. Now, Mr. Wormald, to whom was Irene Adler, quote, always the woman?
Larry Adler,
no, it might turn out to be the case, but no, that isn't the answer. Does anyone else know? Mr. Kerr?
Lytton Strachey.
No. The others won't. Well, she's almost as famous as Maid Marian, I should have thought, since it was to Sherlock Holmes. She was, I think, the 4th most dangerous criminal in London. If I got that wrong, I do hope no one will remind me. Now it's Mr. Widdowson. In which battle did the boys stand on the burning deck and so inspire the poem by Mrs. Hemans?
Minorca.
No. Mr. Wormald?
Battle of Aboukir Bay in Egypt.
Yes, that's so, also called the
Battle of the Nile.
Correct for you. Mrs. Clough, in what film does the Odessa Steppe sequence occur?
Battleship Potemkin.
Right. Which London embassy was designed by the Finnish-born architect Eero Saarinen?
The American.
Correct. Which is the southernmost province or administrative district of mainland Portugal?
The Algarve.
Right. No discussion of future employment trends is complete, it says here, without discussion of microprocessors and the threat from chips. Of what element are the chips usually made?
Silicon.
Right. Which is the penultimate book of the New Testament, the authorized version?
2 Timothy.
No. Mr. Kerr?
Jude.
Right for you. That brings us to the end of our first round. Mr. Widdowson has yet to score. 1 to Mr. Wormald, 4 to Mrs. Clough, 7 to Mr. Kerr. Now, Mr. Kerr, what are the 4 sections of a symphony orchestra?
Strings, woodwind, percussion, brass.
You're right, you got in. Good for you. What does hang seng refer to? Hang-seng.
Currency.
No. Mr. Wormald.
Chinese pottery.
No. Mr. Widdowson, can you guess?
A river of China?
No, sounds very much as though it could be. Mrs. Clough?
Not a clue, actually.
You wouldn't like to guess, would you?
Yes, a judo hold.
That's very convincing. It's actually the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Or, more accurately, I suppose, it's the index. It's the Hang Seng Index, referring to the stock exchange in Hong Kong. It was nice to have your other answers. Mr. Wormald, the Cambridgeshire Handicap is run annually. Where?
Epsom.
No. Mrs. Clough?
Newmarket.
You know about that sort of thing, Mrs. Clough. Splendid, you're quite right. Now it's Mr. Widdowson's turn. Where is the island of Alcatraz, once famous, of course, for that prison?
In the Hudson River?
No, it isn't. Mr. Kerr.
In California.
I think California will do it. As I say, it's smaller than America, which you said to begin with. It's in, I was hoping you'd say San Francisco Bay.
That was what I would have said.
You were going on to, but you didn't think it too necessary. Mrs. Clough, your turn. ENSA was the well-known wartime organisation for the entertainment of troops. What do the initials ENSA stand for?
Entertainment and national... Oh, no, not national. I heard this the other day. I don't remember. I'm sorry. Can't do it.
Have a try.
Entertainment in... No.
You can't.
No, I can't do it.
You can't.
Absolutely.
Mr. Kerr.
Entertainment National Services Association.
You give or take an S or two. Entertainment's National Service Association. Though it was said at the time, I believe, that it stood for every night something awful. But there, at the end of that round, the scores are now these. Mr. Widdowson has yet to score 1 to Mr. Wormald, 5 to Mrs. Clough, 10 to Mr. Kerr. And now it's Mr. Kerr's turn. Steelyard was the name of the Hanseatic establishment in London in the Middle Ages. What is a steelyard?
It's a piece of steel a yard long used in weighing.
It is, or thereabouts. It is a weighing device. More than that I will not say, but you're right. The hero and heroine of what children's books are called Dan and Una? There's more than one book, but there's one more famous than the other. At least in my view it is. No? Mrs. Clough?
Puckapook's Hill and Rewards and Fairies.
Both quite correct, yes. Mr. Wormald, of which European country is the Order of the Elephant, the premier order?
European.
Yeah.
Spain.
No. Mrs. Clough?
Denmark.
Denmark is correct. Mr. Widdowson, what work does this music come from?
The Rosenkavalier.
You're right, indeed. Richard Strauss's opera. What cathedral is the Very Reverend Edward Patey, the Dean?
York.
No. Mr. Kerr?
St. Paul's.
No.
Liverpool.
Right, Mrs. Clough, Liverpool. And now it's your turn again, Mrs. Clough. Who was the architect of Liverpool Cathedral?
Giles Gilbert Scott.
Yes, quite right. Later Sir Giles. Again with you, Mrs. Clough. What is the meaning of the name of the flower primrose?
The earliest thing to come out, a prime flower.
The first, rose, in fact, but you've got the essence of the matter. Ben Travers, who wrote those farces, the Aldrich farces, was 92 last November when his autobiography entitled Sitting on a Gate was published. What was unusual about this autobiography?
That he planned at that age to go on with a number more plays. He had 3 plays running at the same time.
I don't think that could be said to be unusual about the autobiography. So the answer to that, no, you haven't got it right.
No.
Do the others? No. It's rather vaguely phrased, I think, this question. Mr. Widdowson.
He was planning a second installment for some future day.
No. Mr. Wormald, Mr. Kerr?
It was called Part 1.
No. Mr. Wormald, you won't have a go at it. You're all hovering round, at least Mr. Widdowson and Mr. Kerr. It was his second autobiography. So it couldn't have been called Part 1, and he couldn't have meditated a second, but he'd already written one called Vale of Laughter. At the end of the round, the scores are these. 1 to Mr. Widdowson, 1 to Mr. Wormald, 10 to Mrs. Clough, 11 to Mr. Kerr. What metal, Mr. Kerr, is used as the active illuminating material in the original photographer's flash, before the flash bulb was invented?
Magnesium.
Right. Cledwyn Hughes is chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Who is the vice chairman?
Michael Foot.
No? Think of a good name for a vice chairman of the Labour Party. Mr. Widdowson.
Eric Heffer.
No? Mrs. Clough or Mr. Wormald? Have a guess. Think of a name, a Labour Party name. You might get it right. Never know.
Barbara Castle.
Skinner.
No.
Barbara Castle.
No, it's Fred Willy. Fred Willy is the answer. So it's Mr. Wormald's turn. What is the extensive plateau region in the southern half of France called, which covers about 1/6 of the country's surface?
The Camargue. The Camargue, or
No.
the Midi.
No? Mr. Widdowson?
The Massif Central.
It is. And now I think it's your turn again. Where is there to be a major international exhibition held in the year 2000?
New York.
No. Mr. Wormald?
Toronto.
No. Mr. Kerr?
The National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham.
No.
Chicago. Usually Chicago.
Yes, it quite often is, isn't it? All those places figure. But no, it's Paris. And it's to mark the beginning of the third millennium AD in 2001. I don't know that that's any occasion for merrymaking, but they seem to think so. Mrs. Clough, to which family does the Foxglove belong?
Scrofulariaceae.
Absolutely right. Do say it again, just for my pleasure.
Scrofulariaceae. You're asking a lot.
It's just I was looking with apprehension and horror the possibility of having to say it myself, and now I don't. You are quite right, Mrs. Clough. How do you... Oh, I do have to say it. Mrs. Clough, how do you spell Scrofulariaceae? Scrofulariaceae. That's not bad.
You want me to spell it?
That's the next question.
Oh, dear. S-C-R-O-P-H-U... No, it isn't it? P-H-U-L-A-R... I'm lost.
Carry on.
A-C-E.
No.
No, I thought
Mr.
not.
Widdowson, start from the beginning, if you will. It's a good long word, this.
SCROFULARIACEAE.
No. Now, chaps. Ah, yes, Mr. Kerr.
SCROFUL. Could I ask you to repeat the word, please?
I think you're some kind of a sadist, Mr. Kerr. Scrofulariaceae.
I'd got as far as there. A-R...
Oh, you're just trying to put me off looking to see how it is spelled. Yes, go on.
A-C-E-A-E.
Nope. Mr. Wormald, you cannot be left out.
SCROFULARIACEAE.
No. It is S-C-R-O-P-H. Many people fell at the P-H because they thought it was an F. U-L-A-R-I-A-C-E-A-E. Scrofulariaceae. I knew I ought to have stopped that. Scrofulariaceae. Jolly good. Glad to see the back of it, I'll tell you. Now, at the end of that round, the scores are these. 2 to Mr. Widdowson, 1 to Mr. Wormald, 11 to Mrs. Clough, 12 to Mr. Kerr. And now we come to that stage of the programme where we have a couple of questions from a listener who hopes to defeat all 4 of the brains sitting here at this time. On this occasion, it's Mrs. Hole, who lives in Billericay in Essex, and the 2 questions begin with this one. Who said, "This world is a comedy to those that think, a tragedy to those that feel"? Now you have to put your heads together.
Think of the French.
Somebody says innocent.
I think it's French.
Can we try? Yeah. We try Rochefoucauld.
No, it was Horace Walpole. Second question, from which play does the following quotation come, and who is the author? I can resist everything except temptation. Now, you have to have 2 answers to that.
It's certainly wild.
We need a play and an author.
Can we have them the other way around?
Well,
Oscar Wilde.
but you get no response from me till I get the full answer. I mean, I'm quite capable of sitting here and saying nothing.
Lady Windermere's fan.
Well done, yes, in fact. However, you don't win because you didn't get the two right. By the rules of the game, if one of them is won by the listener, the listener wins. So Mrs. Hole of Billericay in Essex will get a book token or a record token. She only has to tell us which. So 3 cheers for Kitty. Now we come back to Mr. Kerr. Where in 1967 did work by Arnold Machin replace work by Dorothy Wilding?
On postage stamps.
Yeah, would you say a word about that? I mean, explain the answer a little.
Dorothy Wilding was the photographer of the Queen's head on the postage stamps prior to that.
Right.
And presumably Arnold Machin took over.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I only wanted to work. You got me to repeat, that terrible word, so I thought I'd get you to work hard. You do get it. You get the 1 mark. What does it mean, Mr. Kerr, when satellites are in geostationary orbit?
It means that they're at a distance of about 22,000 miles and orbit once every 24 hours, so that they stay above the same point on the Earth.
I think that's wholly incorrect. Every bit there, perfectly correct. The Doors of Perception was a book published in the 1950s referring to drugs. Who wrote that book?
Aldous Huxley.
He did. Gascony, one of the old territorial divisions of France, has a common border with which other country?
Spain.
Right. One of Sir Winston Churchill's earliest books was The River War. Where was it fought?
In Cuba.
No. Mr. Widdowson.
South Africa.
No. Mrs. Clough?
I think it was the Sudan.
It was. I was going to say the South Africans a bit too far away, really. Sudan is correct. Now it's Mr. Wormald's go. The largest ethnic group in Kenya is the Kikuyu. Which is the second largest?
The Maasai.
No. Mr. Kerr?
The Luo.
Quite right for you. Mr. Widdowson? More music for you. From which opera does this well-known piece of music come? Listen.
La Gioconda.
Yes, indeed. The dance we had the audience practically twirling in the aisles, whistling, and I don't know what. You're quite right. What is the name of the smallest type of snipe breeding in Britain?
A smew.
It ought to be, sir. It ought to be. Mrs. Clough.
I think it's a jacksnipe.
It is a jacksnipe. It's your turn again, Mrs. Clough. What well-known figure of the cinema is known in Italy as Topolino?
Mickey Mouse.
Right. Premier Rose was discovered in South Africa in April last year, 1978. Who or what is Premier Rose?
A large rose-coloured diamond.
It is. The most expensive rough diamond of modern times. What role in the British coronation is hereditary in the Dimmock family?
The king's challenger. He throws down a glove in front of the monarch or in front of the monarch's enemies.
Close enough. Champion.
Champion.
Rather than challenger, but it comes, I suppose, to the same thing. To what cathedral city would you go to get a wayfarer's dole?
Glastonbury.
No. Mr. Widdowson?
Winchester.
You're right. Winchester. And that brings us to the end of that round. And the scores at the end of that round are these. 1 to Mr. Wormald, 4 to Mr. Widdowson, 16 to Mrs. Clough, 17 to Mr. Kerr. Mr. Kerr, which of the Cinque Ports is on the River Rother?
Rotherhithe.
No. Nice try. Mrs. Clough?
Rye.
Is correct. Rye. Mr. Wormald, pride goes before a fall is a popular proverbial misquotation of a verse in the biblical book of Proverbs. Can you give me the correct version? What does go before a fall?
The haughty.
Close enough. An haughty spirit. And that's how it goes. Pride goes before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. 40 is the essence of it. Mr. Wormald again. What is the main ingredient in couscous? C-O-U-S hyphen C-O-U-S.
Sorry, excuse me again. It's, oh, crikey.
Out of time, Mrs. Clubb.
Semolina.
I think you must have semolina. It's about as, because I think the question was slightly vague, main ingredient. You can't have couscous without semolina. I don't think you can have it without the mutton, which is also a main ingredient. But I think semolina will do. Anyway, it's a sort of North African scout. And I think if it didn't have the mutton in it, it would be called flying couscous. So, Mr. Widdowson, what is a couscous when spelled? C-U-S, C-U-S, without a hyphen.
A flower.
No, Mr. Wormald?
An arboreal mammal.
Yes, let me put it in another way. That's the way it's been printed here by the Roneo machine. A slow-moving nocturnal marsupial found in Queensland and New Guinea. I think that's, you know, not a million miles away. Mrs. Clough, your turn. In what war were the 7 Days battles fought?
I don't know. I'll guess the War of the Sicilian Vespers for a far out one.
No. Always a good thing to have a guess, though. Just don't know. Can anyone have a go at that? Think of a war? Yes, Mr. Kerr?
The Persian Wars.
No. Yes, Mr. Wormald?
The Greeks.
No.
Well,
Mr. Widdowson? Can't be left out.
The Wars of the Roses.
No, the American Civil War, in fact. And at the end of the round, the scores are now these: 3 to Mr. Wormald, 4 to Mr. Widdowson, 17 to Mr. Kerr, and 18 to Mrs. Clough. Mrs. Clough has just inched ahead of Mr. Kerr. What is a wetback, Mr. Kerr?
I don't know.
Mr. Wormald?
It's a person who immigrates across the Rio Grande into America illegally.
Yes, from Mexico to America, which is just what you said, illegally also. Mr. Wormald, your turn again. What do we call the place that the French call Aurigny? A-U-R-I-G-N-Y.
I call it Origny, but,
Well, let's wait and see.
it's the airport.
No. Mr. Widdowson?
Versailles?
No. Mr. Kerr?
Guernsey?
No. Can Mrs. Clough have a snatch one out of the air?
That's right.
No?
Yeah.
No, it's Alderney. So it's perfectly true to say that we do call it Alderney, and they do call it Origny. Mr. Widdowson, how many grams are there in an ounce of what you pour to the nearest gram? Time.
5.
And no, Mr. Wormald?
63.
No. That's very precise. Mr. Kerr?
28.
28's nice, yes, 28.35. Well done. 63 was so precise. I mean, you must be thinking of something else.
Half a pound.
Of course. Well, then. Now, Mrs. Clough, a sculptor born in Florence who died in 1466, aged about 80, has been described as the most influential individual artist of the 15th century. What was his name?
Michelangelo Buonarroti.
No.
Oh.
No, that would... Much of what I said fits in, Mr. Kerr.
Donatello.
Right for you, sir. Now, at the end of the round, the scores are these: 4 to Mr. Widdowson, 4 to Mr. Wormald, 18 to Mrs. Clough, 19 to Mr. Kerr, who is now inched ahead of Mrs. Clough. So it's nip and tuck. This is our last round on this occasion. Mr. Kerr, an English novelist, wrote his first full-length novel under the pseudonym St. John. Who was he?
Thackeray.
No. Mrs. Clough?
I think it was Hardy.
No. Worth a guess, chaps.
Edison?
No.
Hardy.
Hardy's already been said,
Sorry.
Mr. Wormald.
Sorry.
I'll let you have another go if you'd like.
No.
No, it's John Galsworthy. Now it is your turn, Mr. Wormald. In what sport is Desmond Douglas rated number 1 in the United Kingdom and number 7 in the world?
Table tennis.
You're right. Of which of the American states is Augusta the state capital?
Georgia.
No. Anyone know? Take a guess. Guess away.
South Carolina.
No, Mrs. Clough? Mr. Kerr?
Virginia.
No. Mr. Widdowson? Pick up.
South Dakota.
No, it's Maine. That's not so far away. Well, far enough. But Maine is the answer. Now it's your turn, Mr. Widdowson. The Royal Institute of International Affairs is often referred to by its address for short. What is it called?
Chatham House.
Right. What is the name of the Prime Minister of South Africa?
Botha.
Correct. Which country changed in 1967 to driving on the right, leaving only the British Isles and Malta still driving on the left?
Sweden.
Sweden is right. What children created for themselves an imaginary country called Northumberland?
Is this in a C.S. Lewis book?
No. Mrs. Clough?
The Brontes.
The Brontes is right. Now it's your turn, Mrs. Clough. When the Liberals and Conservatives formed their coalition during the First World War, who was the Prime Minister?
Lloyd George.
No. Mr. Kerr?
Asquith.
You're right, sir. Asquith. That brings us to the end of the round and to the end of the competition on this occasion. And the final scores are these. 5 to Mr. Wormald, 7 to Mr. Widdowson, 19 to Mrs. Clough, 20 to Mr. Kerr. And as we need 2 winners, the 2 are quite distinctly Mrs. Clough and Mr. Kerr. They will be playing again in a later round. Next week, the 4 contestants going in for this title will again come from Scotland, and so till then, I bid you goodbye.